Don't cry, mama. Why did you have to leave so soon?
Greetings from Castle Goring, from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. Well, I have to tell you, you may not think so, but I think today I have a lot of very interesting ground to cover. We are going to be covering three main points. The first one is going to be the rather unsettling issue of the demonstration by Archie as to concerns about the way he responds, the really rather very concerning way in which he responds, and the significance of it. Then afterwards, we are going to be covering not only the cock-up with Meghan's trademarking and merching and exploitation, but why it is acceptable to Harry as a result of what the Spencers did to his mother. And last, but by no means least, because in some ways it's the most important subject of all, we are going to be addressing via Professor Jonathan Haslam's contribution, as well as my observations on the Ukrainian situation and the press conference, and what it indicated between Sir Keir Starmer and President Trump. To me, the most interesting and the most important is the last, but I'm sure not everybody's going to agree with me, so if I'm sorry. I'll plunge in with the royal lightweight stuff first, okay? Because I have been flooded with comments not only on this channel but on Twitter about what everybody else has observed as well with regard to that truly extraordinary exchange between Meghan and Archie. So I'll start with what Laurie Mill says. If Archie was just being polite, he would have excitedly answered, "Yes, please, mummy." He was afraid to even say yes. "Only if you want me." Poor kid. Poor kid is absolutely right. I've been there. I've done it. I've seen my brother and sisters being there and having done it as well. I said it was chilling. It truly is. But Deanne Gilchrist says, I caught what the child responded to, and it gave me chills. Well, it chilled my blood. I couldn't believe that she actually was so totally unaware, or maybe just proud of the domination and control that she has, that she had to show the world, you see, I, the great Meghan, have such total control of my environment that my husband Harry's son defers to me to the nth degree. Andrea King says, Archie sounds like he has an insecure attachment to Meghan. and that he is hyper vigilant around her. That is very, very standard when you have an extremely dominating, controlling, picky mother, especially with boys. Girls are often trickier with their mothers than boys are. I just say that for what it's worth. Ms. THG says, poor meek little Archie. Compare that to William and Catherine's funny, bossy, and cheeky kids. They all have their individual characters, but behave like children who know they are loved. And they have such a good example of what a good marriage looks like. That will stand them in good stead in their lives. Well, Catherine was brought up in a family that had a good marriage, and William and Harry had the benefit of seeing their father's second marriage. They also had the disadvantage, of course, of seeing their parents' marriage. But they have been able to see what both a good marriage looks like and a bad marriage looks like. But you see, I am told that when Meghan is around, the only person who is allowed to be funny, bossy, or cheeky is her. Unless, of course, it's some billionaire or celebrity that she wishes to cultivate, in which case she slathers on the charm and laughs hysterically at everything. Oh, sorry, that's Camilla. Oh, anyway, you get it. Because she's a great one for the robust laugh that's wildly inappropriate to the circumstances. But otherwise, no. Sylvia says, we always tell him manners make the man. Manners, 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 manners. As Meghan told Alison P. Davis in the Cut article, August of 2022. How old was Archie then? Interesting question. Wasn't Archie born in 2019? 3 years old. Talk about bending that little sapling to one's will. My goodness. I didn't realize that Meghan was also called Gloria, my mother. This is now the question continuing. I used to hold out great hope that Archie was a figment of their imaginations. Well, he's not. Both Archie and Lily exist, as I have said time and again. I've had it from the highest authority possible that those children actually do exist. So when people say that they don't, that's wishful thinking. They do exist. Also, if I remember correctly, the correct expression is manners maketh man, clothes the woman. And manners is also a singular, not a plural. So Meghan has managed to get it wrong on all counts. But she has given the game away. She has that child so tightly controlled that he is clearly terrified of anything approximating a natural response in a situation like that. Deeply chilling. Eve Morgan says, when my children were little, they used to love playing with the hose, spraying each other and their dad and me. It was great fun. For a child to answer as Archie did shows that he is terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. And this is where Professor Balthrup's observations to me about the difference between children that are being overly controlled and therefore being abused, and children who are just being properly disciplined. That's where the difference comes in. A degree of anxiety might be indicative of respect, but terror, fear, outstanding to the extent that a child is saying not, oh, I'd love to, or yes, I'd like to, or oh, I hope I'm going to do it all right, mummy. And also, do you notice, and I make this point for what it's worth, Meghan made such an issue at her wedding of those little girls not being allowed to wear socks, with the result that the shoes chafed their feet, as well as it was cool enough for them to get cold with bare legs. But have you noticed? Those children do not call her mom. She's a mom, but she has them calling her mummy. Not mummy, mummy. So she's bringing them up to be proper little princes and princesses, terrified of being natural. Also, have you noticed, whenever you see photographs of Lily, she is in socks up to her knees. She is dressed up as if she is at Windsor. Have you not noticed that? Because I've noticed it. So isn't it ridiculous that this woman has detached Harry's children from Harry's family and their royal environment and taken them to California. And they're now going to be flogged for all their worth. Kids for sale, $599 for a look-in. Going cheap, they should be $5,999, but I'm going to give you a bargain because I picked up all my trading techniques in the souk when I went to buy the hair that I got from those 1,000 Turkish virgins. Don't you like my rat's tails? I think the whole thing is just absolutely chilling, is the word I keep on using, and I will come back to it. I think there is a very good reason why Meghan has up to now kept those children out of public view. Because if they are being brought up so unnaturally, let's stick to unnatural and just leave it at that. But Meghan is a great controller, and ironically enough, that was one of the traits that the royal family at first regarded as a virtue, because she was able to control Harry, who up to then was uncontrollable. But she very quickly figured out, if I gain the upper hand and keep him where I want him, my foot firmly on his head, that's gonna put me in the driving seat, which it did. And also it meant that she was able to exert control over Harry. By his own admission, when he tried his usual stunt with throwing his weight around and tossing his rage around with it, she quite rightly drew a line. And he realized he was dealing with a real toughie, and he loved every minute of it. But does Archie? Not by the sound of it. I know what it's like to have been brought up by an over-controlling parent. I wasn't even allowed to make a sound while breathing, with the result that to this day, I know I don't breathe properly. Is that not interesting? I'm aware of it, sometimes more than others. But if I breathed too loudly, I was told not to do it, even breathing. We were never allowed to fidget, ever. Never. Not around Mummy. Never. We had to be still. We weren't allowed to speak except when we were required to speak, and then we had to be sparkling, and we had to be witty, and some of it was good because she certainly taught us social skills, but my goodness, the terror that she inflicted upon us and that she created within us. And I see resonances of that. And we were not so timid that we ever would have said what Archie said. I mean, that's seriously timid. That's seriously, I dare not even say yes. I dare not show any enthusiasm. All I can do is bend to the will of this monster of self-regard, because that clearly is the message that everybody gives out with any interaction with Meghan. She is a monster of self-regard, and she requires everybody with whom she is emotionally involved and not using or setting up to be used, in which case, so she's like my mother was, very magnanimous and generous and charm itself and this and that and all the rest of it. But when the chips are down, it's all about her. So let us get on to what Stephen Magnus says. Lady C, Meghan has already obtained in Delaware the following registered companies: Archie Products Incorporated, Archie Enterprises LLC, Archie Holdings 1 LLC, Archduke. It's not Archduke, Archduke. Well, I'm very classy. I cock my finger when I take tea. Archduke LLC. Well, this is the point at which I can tell you that I have been receiving very interesting information from someone I know who has volunteered it to me. Very kindly. I can't say who it is, but it's somebody who is a part of the entertainment and publishing world. Doesn't want me to use their name, so I won't. But there is a reason why Harry thinks it's okay for Meghan to behave as she does. Although he doesn't want her exploiting his children or himself. But a part of him clearly is conflicted and thinks, well, maybe I'm the one who's being a little bit rigid. Because his grandmother Frances Shankidd and his aunt Sarah in 1998, in March 1998, so that was 7 months after Diana died, Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's sister, and their mother, Frances Shankidd, made various copyright applications in the United States of America. They didn't do it in England. And their objective was to merge Diana, dead Diana's name, popularity, status, to their financial benefit and the financial benefit of her estate. Now, let us remember that Diana, when she died, she left a side letter of wishes, which normally executors and executrices would respect, for a portion of her estate to be divided amongst her godchildren. And her mother and her sister said, we're not going to do that. Oh, so what did they do? Instead of giving each of the godchildren a sizable amount of money, they gave them things like a photograph. It's so generous. So kind. Well, legal, but I'm sorry. I do not think that's admirable, and anybody who does and I will have to disagree on that point. But it shows the determination to cut everybody out except those in the family who they thought should get the benefit of Diana's takings. And let's remember, Diana had, only the year before her death, managed to clean out Prince Charles, as he then was, to the tune of £17 million by blackmailing him, by saying, if you don't give me £17 million, in fact, it started out as a bit more, I am going to get George Smith, the mad courtier, servant, stroke, whatever he was. He'd been a servant, and he wasn't a courtier, he was a servant. But he was crackers. And he had, I'm going to get George Smith to give an affidavit that's going to make all sorts of very untoward comments about you and Michael Fawcett. And Charles succumbed to the blackmail. Do we begin to see that maybe there are precedents for what Harry regards as flexible behavior? Well, in 1998, I'm going to ask Sean to post one of the applications, the one where they try to trademark Diana's name and signature. They also tried to trademark Diana, Princess of Wales. And they also tried to trademark the People's Princess. None of them was successful. Now, why weren't they successful? Well, in the United States of America, you cannot copyright locations. You cannot copyright the names of other people. You cannot copyright titles in general, and definitely not the titles of other people. Because, of course, to do so would have meant that had they been able to copyright Diana, Princess of Wales, or just the Princess of Wales, or Princess of Wales, no other Princess of Wales could be thereafter able to use their title. You can't also, and I'm going to read what this person said. That would mean the current Princess of Wales was using her title illegally if the mother and sister of Diana had been successful in their trademarking application. It falls on its own stupidity. You cannot trademark words that mean anything in other languages or that are meaningless, such as ever or archetypes. It means nothing, and it's just common words. Meghan will not have success with that. It would mean she could sue anybody ending a public letter, for example, with as ever. Basically, you cannot own words, locations, titles, or names of other people, all of which Meghan has tried to do. So, the overreach is beyond belief. However, what people don't realize is that Meghan, as a little girl, was making trademark applications. I don't remember what she did and when she did it, but I do remember she did it when she was a little girl, maybe 12, 14 years old. She was busy applying for copyrights and trademarks at that age. I mean, absolutely staggering. Staggering. But it shows she's always had a long view of her prospects. She always felt she was going to be a dominant factor in the world. She expected, well, she told her school, she said, I'll be back in 10 or 12 years when I'm rich and famous. And she came back. It took more than 10 or 12 years, but she came back as the Duchess of Sussex. Cock my finger as I take tea. I'm so classy. So I'm going to ask Sean at this point to do the two photographs of the Diana application, so you'll see what I mean and how utterly mercenary the Spencers set out to be. Talk about a fine example of a way to behave. And now we get to the really rather more important and meaningful bits, in my opinion. And hopefully I'm not going to lose too many viewers. Pretty please. Mariana R. says, Lady C, today Prime Minister Starmer visited President Trump at the White House. Yes, he did. And Trump went out of his way to be super gracious. He brought a letter from King Charles inviting President Trump to London for a state dinner, I think a state visit as well. I think it was a good press conference, though I think Starmer looked intense. He reminded me of a rat which was sitting in a PVC pipe in my backyard that I shone my torchlight on a while ago. Love it. Anyway, Lady C, President Trump accepted the King's invitation. I am sure that the King's son, just Harry, has to be on the minds of both men. Don't think so. Harry is a fly to be flicked off at this stage. I'm sure that the King's son, just Harry, has to be on the minds of both men. Do you think that Charles is kind of buttering up the president to have mercy on his son and not deport him? I think President Trump has already said he has no intention of deporting him. Of course, if the legal process requires that Harry be deported, that would be another matter. But I don't think Trump is going to deport Harry. I have to tell you why. Because Trump knows nobody in the royal family wants Harry back here. Not certainly while he's saddled with that albatross. So, if I may continue. Harry's case with Heritage Foundation is coming up soon, and I hope his arse is handed to him. I'm not quite sure what that means. Lady C, can you comment on the press conference? Do you agree that Starmer looked... Oh, well, okay. Let me just finish with the Harry bit. I'm not quite sure what that means, but it's a judicial process. It's a legal process. The judge has the right to make a certain sort of call. But if a judge were going to be recommending the deportation of the son of a foreign head of state, let me point out to you that most royals travel on special passports and special visas. Okay? That doesn't mean that they are immune from the law, but it does mean that they occupy a more privileged category than the average person. And we need to bear that in mind. Also, President Trump has already stated that he has no intention of deporting Harry because he has enough problems as it is. He's married to the terrible Meghan. And Trump knows that we don't want Harry back in this country. Certainly not with his bangarang, as the Jamaicans would put it. So, Lady C, can you comment on the press conference? Do you agree that Starmer looked like a rat discovered in a PVC pipe? Love you so much. I almost never miss you, but if I do, I make sure and catch up later. Thank you. Love to you, Mickey Aurora, and of course, Miss Piggles. Well, here is Mr. Piggles. Oh, and while you forgot to mention Meghan, the pig in lipstick that's been named after the glorious Duchess. Lady C, you are a riot. Thank you very much. Glad you think so. I try wherever possible to make life interesting, entertaining, and as joyous as possible. Now, I'm going to read out what Anna Moore says, and then I'm going to answer the whole of this in one. Lady C, I caught you and Professor Jonathan Haslam on Dan Wootton Outspoken separately on Thursday. You posted something about a weekend at Castle Goring on the 2nd February on X, and they were both there. Is that where they met? Actually, it is. If you haven't seen the show, could you please watch it and comment on what they were discussing about Ukraine? Also, what's your take on Sir Two-Tier and President Trump's meeting? Okay, so I'll answer all of that in one. Yes, Jonathan Haslam and Dan met here. And yes, you're right. On the 2nd of February, I posted on Twitter some photographs of the weekend here. It was a wonderful weekend with everybody so interesting, so well informed. I would recommend to anybody who wishes to be better informed about Ukraine that go and watch the Dan Wootton show on Thursday, the 27th of February, where he interviews Professor Jonathan Haslam. He is the world's leading expert on Ukraine. I thought that the program was absolutely brilliant. I also thought that the press conference was really interesting. So, and I would recommend to anybody who hasn't looked at those two things that they look at them, because they are really very eye-opening and edifying. In the Dan Wootton Outspoken interview with Professor Jonathan Haslam, Jonathan makes a great point, which I totally agree with, and that anybody in their right mind will agree with, which is that this war will be settled, if it's going to be settled, between the United States of America and Russia. And if it's not, it's going to end up in the most disastrous consequences for Ukraine and Europe, and most likely the world. But I think it will be settled. Ukraine is going to have to give up the Crimea, without a doubt, in my mind. Russia will have to make concessions with regard to some of the territory that it has annexed, but not Ukraine, not Crimea. The Crimea has always been Russian. They have never, ever ratified any claim that Ukraine might have to it. The Crimea was occupied by Prince Potemkin in the reign of Catherine the Great. I happen to be friends with the present heir to the Khanate of the Crimea. It was a Muslim Khanate. Khan is principality. A Khan is a prince, and a Khanate is a principality. The Girays, who were the Khans of the Crimea, are still Crimean and Russian princes, acknowledged as such all over the world. The Crimea isn't only where all the imperial family had their summer palaces, it's where the Black Sea Fleet has always had its base. There is no way this is why President Obama was absolutely right in not trying to get Russia to give back the Crimea. Because, so that I think is, Russia will have to give up something, Ukraine will have to give up something, and America is going to, in the process of gaining a lot in terms of having minerals that it needs supplied from Ukraine, it will be a reciprocal arrangement which will actually suit both the Russians and the Ukrainians, because in the act of ceding mineral rights to the United States of America, the Ukrainians will be protected thereafter, because Russia will not dare to try to supplant the United States of America once it has absolute treaty rights to certain minerals and the minerals are in the eastern section of Ukraine. So that's near Russia. So that's a very important point. It will provide protection for all parties, because Russia doesn't want a war. Russia didn't want a war. Ukraine doesn't or shouldn't want a war, and it certainly didn't originally want a war. It's the Americans and the American military industrial complex that wanted the war, and they're the ones that pushed and for the war by making demands that they knew were crossing a red line with the Russians. What's really interesting is that no one has mentioned China, or the part that China has been playing in Ukraine with its trade agreements, and the part that it, therefore, this gives it a right. Nobody's mentioning that. It's as if it doesn't exist. Take it from me, the United States government and the Russian government will both know that it exists, and they will both have factored that into the equation. But the mainstream media in Europe and the United States and the United Kingdom is so obtuse and so uninformed and so rancorously prejudiced and so stupid, really, in the way that they handle things. They haven't even factored any of this into the equation. It's as if it doesn't exist. And neither the Ukrainians nor the Russians at the moment are mentioning any of this, nor are the Americans or the Europeans. And it is quite possible that the Europeans do not even think of it, because certainly Sir Keir Starmer is ridiculous, as is much of the European representations politically. They, first of all, let's take Sir Keir Starmer. He is acting as if, and this I agree, Jonathan Haslam made this point with Dan Wootton, and I totally agree with it. He is following the delusional Whitehall party line of, we are the British. Oh, we are still a great power. We're not. It's pretension and it's ridiculous. And Trump, more or less, in a very diplomatic way, in the press conference, made that point. He was very gracious about it, but he was very much the very successful, very rich, billionaire younger nephew, while Keir Starmer was the old sort of déclassé, broken down, almost begging, but we're bigging him up to make him feel okay, uncle. So virtually a penniless uncle beside the billionaire nephew. And what no one is mentioning, and it's really important, is that Trump and Putin are very aware of the fact that there is a recalibration worldwide going on at the moment. And it is in the interest of the Christian West to understand that its interests coincide far more effectively with each other's than with colluding with the weakening of an element within the Christian West. Because Jonathan, I think, is the one who made the point. Yes, he did. It's Jonathan who made the point that there's likely at some point to be quite an economic reversal in the West. The chickens are going to come home to roost at some point economically. Russia has most of the natural wealth in the world. Russia is inevitably going to be extremely rich and successful in a few years. And our attempt to try to break up Russia, because remember Biden wanted it broken up into 22 separate countries, it's failed. And not only is Trump sensible enough to understand that this would be devastating for the West generally and would most likely cause a third world war, but it also wouldn't play well with the non-Christian emerging spheres of influence, namely Confucian China, Hindu India. Those are the two biggies to consider. None of this is being touched upon by anybody. It's as if it doesn't exist. Well, I'm here to tell you it exists. It exists. Trump also made a very interesting point. And I picked up what he was saying, even though I think many people wouldn't have. He was basically saying that Putin is far more trustworthy than many of the supposed good guys. And he's right. Putin has never gone back on his word. Putin also inherited what is, as Jonathan Haslam made the point in the Dan Wootton Outspoken interview, that this is a state problem. It's not a political problem. It's a state problem. It is an existential problem that Putin inherited with the collapse of communism and that with the problems that started with Clinton and Yeltsin. Yeltsin was not at fault. Clinton is the one who was at fault. And I've touched upon this before. When Russia wanted to join the family of nations, it's the Clinton government that said no. The French, Chirac, the Germans, Kohl, the British, Major, all wanted it. It's the Clinton government that didn't want it. But Trump is wise enough to understand, and I'm very encouraged by this, that it is in the West's interest to cleave together, because you can have a strong America, you can have a strong Europe. If you have a weakened Europe, The Chinese are there, ready and waiting to gobble up all the beautiful steak that we are just going to throw on the floor. They will pick it up. And they're quite right to pick it up as well, if we're dumb enough to do it. Who causes a problem at the moment is many of the Europeans. But I notice in this press conference that Keir Starmer was relatively chastened. Now, Trump, whatever his failings, and you shouldn't listen to Trump, you should go by what he does, not what he says. He's a great one for saying things, and he's a showman, and he has distraction techniques, all of which are very good with political leaders. I've said it time and again. Political leaders, to be effective, need to have everybody else on the back foot. To be too predictable, to be too readable, to be too clubbable is actually not in a nation's best interests. And I think what will most likely happen is that there will be peace, that Ukraine will have to give up something, Russia will have to give up something. In the act of the Americans obtaining mineral rights, which they then have the right to extract, they will be their presence will protect Ukraine against what would appear to be Russian aggression. But Russia, contrary to what the West will tell you, and the idiots who come up with this nonsense, Russia is not an aggressive power. It's not the Soviet Union. It's not trying to gobble up Poland. It's not trying to gobble up the Baltic states. All of this is rubbish, and Trump has made that clear, and I couldn't agree with him more. And Professor Haslam will make it clear as well. All of this is rubbish by the idiotic ignoramuses, some of whom lead various countries in the West, and many of whom are employed by the publications to chat utter rubbish. As long as Russia has a neutral peace with Ukraine and no threat from the European Union and the United States of America via Ukraine, everybody will be happy. Everybody. Unfortunately, it's taken the totally unnecessary destruction of Ukraine, which the situation could have been solved, and this you need to listen to Jonathan Haslam speaking to Dan Wootton about, because the whole situation could have been very easily solved shortly after the war began, and Boris Johnson is the one who sabotaged it. I have slightly different ideas as to why he did this from Jonathan, but I certainly respect his opinion. And the fact of the matter is, it was sabotaged. There should never have been a continuing war. Never. And the United States of America should never have, as a result of the provocation of having a CIA-inspired coup against the lawfully elected president of the Ukraine, Yanukovych, in 2014, if I remember correctly. which started the whole of the collapse of the best interests of the Ukrainians and the Russians, because it's not been in either Ukraine or Russia's interest to have had this war. But this is where we're at. I think that to wrap up, Trump was magnanimous and gracious to Starmer. Trump is very capable of coming out with stinging comments and then moving on from them. A lot of people don't like his technique. I don't like everything about him. There are certain things he does that I think, I don't like that. But ultimately, if he gets us peace, that will be wonderful. And I think he's going to get us peace, because he understands something that the Bidens of this world don't understand. He sees Vladimir Putin as what he really is, not what they would like to think of him as being. The only way to have a real settlement that is lasting is to deal with the realities of the situation. And both Trump and Putin are prepared to do that. It's a pity that under the previous regime that was not allowed to take place. But the Biden government administration was so eager to play to the European gallery and to play to, we are so honorable that we are happy to sacrifice the lives of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians, because that's the noble thing to do. Well, Trump says no, the noble thing to do is have peace, and I agree with him. So I would recommend that you look at both the interviews and you tell me what you think and ask me any questions you'd like on the subject. Because I actually think that, to wrap this up entirely, I think that Trump has played with the United Kingdom a magnanimous game, or I should say a magnanimous hand. Because if we have lower tariffs than the European Union, that means we are in a better position than the European Union. And also, Trump has been big enough, and let's give credit where it's due, to have ignored the shockingly abusive way both Starmer and David Lammy spoke about him. I'm pretty damn sure if Trump had said the equivalent of Starmer and of David Lammy in as pejorative and vicious and nasty a tone as they both assumed, I think they would be gunning for him. Trump is saying, well, it's the British Prime Minister, it's the British Foreign Secretary. My mother was British. I like Britain. I have interests in Britain. I like the royal family. And make no mistake about this. If it were up to Starmer and Lammy's existence alone, Trump would be behaving in an entirely different way. It is the fact that we are headed by King Charles III, whom he knows and likes, now, and that the next head of state is going to be William, whom he knows and likes. He loves the royal family. We are lucky. We may no longer be the great power that we are, but as long as we have our royal family, we remain Great Britain. And if you have enjoyed this, may I ask you to keep the questions and comments coming in so I will know what you would like us to be speaking about. Thank you so much. Take good care. Godspeed. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and Godspeed. Bye-bye.